Caught my cheating wife and her secret lover. Paternity test shattered my world. I exposed their lies and laid out a revenge they never saw coming. The paternity test results lay crumpled in Rick Dalton's calloused hands like a death sentence. 2 boys, 11 years and 8 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees, and proud father moments. Not his blood, not even close. The paper trembled as Rick read the results again in the dim light of his repair truck. Child A, 0% probability of paternity. Child B, 0% probability of paternity. The clinical language felt like ice picks driving into his chest. He'd suspected something for months. Kara's late-night phone calls, her sudden interest in expensive clothes, the way she flinched when he tried to touch her. But this was nuclear devastation wrapped in laboratory letterhead. Rick folded the papers and shoved them into his toolbox next to the industrial grade. Wrenches that had built his modest refrigeration repair business from nothing. 15 years of marriage, 13 years believing he was a father, all of it built on lies thick enough to choke on. His phone buzzed. A text from Dean Moraro, his so-called business partner and friend. "Hey buddy, got that wine fridge acting up again? Mind swinging by tonight? Kara mentioned you're free." Rick stared at the message. Dean's house, where Kara had been spending her Tuesday evenings. For book club, where she claimed to be discussing literature with the neighborhood wives. The same Dean who'd been helping Rick expand his business, providing wholesale parts at friendship prices. Rick typed back, "On my way, the drive to Dean's McMansion took 12 minutes. Through suburban streets lined with perfect lawns and perfect lies." Rick pulled into the circular driveway, his beat-up service truck looking like a tumor next to Dean's pristine BMW and Mercedes. Dean answered the door in a silk bathrobe, hair still damp from a shower. "Rick, thanks for coming out so late, man. Wine fridge just stopped cooling completely. You know how it is. Got some expensive bottles in there, no problem." Rick hefted his toolbox. "Lead the way." The house reeked of expensive cologne and fresh closeness. Rick followed Dean through marble hallways lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Rick made in a year. They descended into a finished basement that looked like a gentleman's club. Leather furniture, crystal decanters, and the problematic wine fridge humming angrily in the corner. "Started making weird noises yesterday," Dean explained, settling into a leather chair with a glass of scotch. "Then just died completely this morning." Rick knelt beside the unit, running his hands over familiar components. Loose compressor belt. Simple 15-minute fix. He opened his toolbox and began working, muscle memory taking over, while his mind churned through darker calculations. "How's Kara doing?" Dean asked casually. "She seemed stressed last time she was here." Rick's wrench slipped, nearly skinning his knuckles. "When was that?" "Tuesday night book club. You know, though, between you and me, I think the ladies spend more time drinking wine than reading books." Dean chuckled. "Not that I'm complaining. Kara's great company." The compressor belt snapped back into place with a satisfying click. Rick stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Mind if I use your bathroom? Long day, sure thing. Upstairs, master bedroom, only one with decent water pressure." Rick climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like walking toward his own execution. The master bedroom was a monument to excess. California king bed with black silk sheets, a walk-in closet bigger than Rick's entire garage, and a bathroom that belonged in a luxury hotel. He splashed cold water on his face, staring at his reflection in the gold-framed mirror. 41 years old. Gray creeping through his brown hair, hands permanently stained with grease and honest work. What had he expected? That a woman like Kara would stay satisfied with a man like him forever? Rick reached for a towel and froze. There, tucked behind a stack of expensive bath products, was a Polaroid photograph. His heart stopped completely. Kara, his wife, naked, except for black lingerie he'd never seen before, posed provocatively on the marble vanity where Rick now stood. Her wedding ring glinted on her finger as she touched herself. Eyes locked. On the camera, with an expression of pure lust Rick hadn't seen in years. The photo shook in Rick's hands, written on the bottom in Kara's handwriting, "For my real man." Rick pocketed the photo and walked downstairs on legs that felt like concrete pillars. Dean was refilling his scotch, completely relaxed. "All fixed," Rick said, his voice sounding strange and distant. "Compressor belt came loose. Should run fine now. You're a lifesaver, buddy." Dean pulled out his wallet. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing." "Friends help friends, right?" Dean grinned and extended his hand. Rick shook it, noting how soft Dean's palm felt compared to his own scarred knuckles. Rich man's hands that had never built anything, never fixed anything, never earned anything through sweat and sacrifice. "Kara's lucky to have a guy like you," Dean said. "Reliable, dependable, salt of the earth, you know." "Yeah," Rick replied. "I know exactly what I am." The drive home felt like floating through a nightmare. Rick's house looked smaller than usual, the modest two-story colonial dwarfed by the memory of Dean's mansion. Kara's car wasn't in the driveway, still at book club, probably, or Dean's bed. Rick sat in his truck for 20 minutes, staring at the house where he'd believed he was building a family. The Polaroid felt like acid against his chest, tucked inside his work shirt next to his heart. His phone rang. "Hey, honey," Kara said. "Book club's running late tonight. Don't wait up." "Okay. Love you." "Love you too," Rick said automatically, the words tasting like broken glass. The boys were asleep when Rick finally went inside. He stood in the doorway of their shared bedroom, watching Tommy and Jake sleep peacefully under superhero blankets. 11 and 8 years old, DNA that traced back to Dean Marrero, not Rick Dalton. But they didn't know that. They called him Dad, hugged him when he came home from work, asked him to fix their bikes and help with homework. That love was real, even if the biology wasn't. Rick pulled out the paternity test results and read them one final time before feeding the papers into the kitchen shredder. The machine chewed up the laboratory proof of his humiliation with mechanical efficiency. But the Polaroid, that stayed, evidence for later. Kara came home at 2:17 a.m., slipping into bed like a ghost. She smelled like expensive soap and unfamiliar cologne. Rick pretended to sleep, listening to her breathing settle into the rhythm of someone with a clear conscience. Morning came with the usual chaos: breakfast, backpacks the boys fighting over, cereal bowls, while Kara rushed around in her real estate office clothes. She kissed Rick goodbye with lips that had been wrapped around another man hours earlier. "Have a good day, honey. Love you." "Love you too." After everyone left, Rick sat at his kitchen table and began planning. Revenge wasn't a dish best served cold. It was a machine that needed to be built carefully, with precision and patience. One wrong move, and the whole thing would explode in his face. First, he needed more evidence. The Polaroid was devastating but not comprehensive. Rick spent the morning installing a voice-activated recording app on Kara's laptop, hidden deep in the system files where she'd never find it. Then, he cloned her phone, redirecting copies of all texts and calls to a burner device he bought with cash. By afternoon, Rick had a complete picture of his wife's betrayal, text messages spanning 8 months, explicit photos, voice recordings of phone intimacy sessions. While Rick worked late in his garage, even financial records showing Kara had been transferring money from their joint account to Dean's business. But the worst discovery came buried in a folder labeled Future Plans, legal documents, divorce papers already drawn up, custody. Agreements giving Kara primary custody of the boys, while Rick paid maximum child support for children who weren't his. She'd planned everything. The affair wasn't passion, it was strategy. Rick printed every document, every photo, every text message. He organized the evidence in manila folders like building a case file, because that's exactly what he was doing. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Rick's life, pretending everything was normal while documenting every lie, every betrayal, every casual cruelty. Kara grew bolder, staying out later, making less effort to hide her contempt for Rick and their boring life together. "Maybe you should think about expanding the business," she suggested over dinner one night. "Dean says there's lots of opportunity in commercial refrigeration. Big money." "Dean says a lot of things," Rick replied carefully. "He's trying to help you, Rick. God knows you need it. We can't live like this forever." The boys looked between their parents, sensing tension they couldn't understand. Tommy, the older one, reached over and patted Rick's hand. "Dad, are you okay?" Rick forced a smile. "Just tired, buddy. Work stuff." That night, Rick listened to Kara's phone call with Dean through his hidden recordings. "He's so pathetic," Kara's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Just sits there like a kicked dog. I almost feel sorry for him." "Not much longer," Dean replied. "Once the divorce goes through, you'll be free. We both will." "What about the boys?" "What about them? Rick will pay child support, and they'll have a real father figure in their lives. Win-win." Rick turned off the recording and stared at his ceiling until sunrise. The end of the month brought Rick's opportunity. Dean's warehouse received a massive shipment of commercial refrigeration units, a contract worth nearly $500,000. The delivery was scheduled for a Friday night when most businesses were closed. Rick had been studying the warehouse's security system for weeks. Dean was too arrogant to invest in serious protection, relying on basic cameras and motion sensors that a skilled technician could easily bypass. Friday night, Rick parked 6 blocks away and walked to the warehouse, carrying a gym bag full of tools. He cut through the fence behind the loading dock and disabled the alarm system, using techniques learned from 15 years of emergency service calls. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of stacked appliances and parts. Rick moved through the darkness like a ghost, planting small devices throughout the building. Not explosives, nothing that would hurt anyone, something much more elegant: refrigerant gas, specifically ammonia-based coolant, that would slowly leak from punctured lines throughout the weekend. By Monday morning, the entire warehouse would smell like a chemical disaster zone. The health department would shut it down immediately, and Dean's $500,000 contract would evaporate along with his business reputation. Rick also planted several small packets of marijuana in strategic locations. Nothing major, just enough to trigger possession charges when the police inevitably searched the contaminated building. But the masterpiece was Dean's office computer. Rick installed a virus that would slowly corrupt the hard drive while simultaneously uploading Dean's financial records to an anonymous tip line for tax fraud investigations by 3 a.m. Rick was back home in bed, listening to Kara's gentle snoring. She had no idea her world was about to collapse. Saturday morning brought the first domino falling. Rick's phone rang at 8 a.m. Rick, thank God, it's Dean. I need your help, man. Something's wrong at the warehouse. Smells like a chemical leak. You know anything about refrigerant systems? Rick rubbed his eyes, feigning grogginess. Chemical leak? That sounds dangerous, Dean. You should call the fire department. I can't afford to have this place shut down. I've got a massive delivery Monday morning. Can you just take a look, please? Sorry, buddy. That's beyond my skill level. You need hazmat specialists for chemical leaks. Rick hung up and smiled at his coffee cup. By Monday, the local news was running stories about the mysterious contamination in Marrero appliance distribution. Dean's contracts were canceled. His insurance company launched an investigation. The IRS received an anonymous tip about unreported income. But Rick was just getting started. Tuesday brought phase 2. Kara's car, a leased BMW she could barely afford, suffered a mysterious mechanical failure in the parking lot of her real estate office. The refrigeration unit in the trunk, installed to keep champagne cold for client celebrations, exploded during a staff meeting. Nobody was hurt, but the resulting chaos destroyed Kara's presentation to a major client. Worse, the investigation revealed the unit had been deliberately tampered with. Insurance fraud investigators began asking uncomfortable questions about Kara's recent financial activities. Rick watched the news coverage from his garage, surrounded by the tools of his trade. Every wrench, every gauge, every component had become a weapon in his war against betrayal. Wednesday, Dean called again. Rick, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be straight with me. Have you been to my warehouse recently? Your warehouse? Why would I go there? Someone sabotaged my inventory, professional job, the kind of thing that takes serious technical knowledge. Rick paused, letting the silence stretch. You think I sabotaged your business? I don't know what to think anymore. Everything's falling apart. The tax guys are crawling up my ass. Insurance won't pay for the contamination, and now Kara's having car trouble too. It's like someone's got it out for both of us. Maybe you should examine your recent choices, Rick said quietly. Sometimes consequences take a while to catch up. The line went dead. Thursday evening, Rick received an unexpected visitor. Kara's sister, Michelle, knocked on his door, looking uncomfortable and angry. We need to talk, Michelle said, pushing past Rick into the house. They sat in the living room where Rick had once believed he was part of a happy family. Michelle clutched a manila envelope like a weapon. Kara asked me to give you these, she said, sliding divorce papers across the coffee table. She's staying at a hotel until you move out. Rick glanced at the papers without touching them. Just like that? Rick, we all know this marriage has been over for years. Kara deserves to be happy. The boys deserve stability. Stability? Rick laughed, a sound like breaking machinery. That's interesting coming from Kara. Michelle's face flushed. Look, I know you're hurt, but dragging this out won't help anyone. Sign the papers, split the assets, work out custody, be adults about this. Rick stood and walked to his filing cabinet. He pulled out a thick folder and set it on the table next to the divorce papers. Before I sign anything, Rick said, I think you should see what kind of woman your sister really is. Michelle opened the folder and her face went white. Photographs, text messages, financial records. 8 months of documented adultery and fraud, organized with mechanical precision. Oh my God, Michelle whispered, staring at the Polaroid from Dean's bathroom. Rick, I had no idea. Neither did I until recently. Michelle flipped through page after page of evidence, her hands shaking. The boys, they're not mine, biologically speaking. but I've been their father in every way that matters for over a decade. This is insane. Kara can't. She wouldn't. Rick pulled out his phone and played a recorded conversation. Kara's voice filled the room. Rick's such an idiot. He actually thinks those kids are his. When this is all over, he'll be paying child support for Dean's sons while I'm living in that beautiful house. It's perfect. Michelle dropped the folder, photographs scattering across the floor like shrapnel from an exploded life. I need to go, she said, standing on unsteady legs. Michelle. Rick's voice stopped her at the door. When you see your sister, tell her I got the message loud and clear, and tell her I'm sending one back. Friday morning, Rick drove to the abandoned ice factory on the outskirts of town. He'd worked there briefly after high school before starting his own business. The building had been empty for 5 years, but the old refrigeration systems were still intact. Massive units that could cool an entire city block. Rick spent the day preparing the space. He rigged the main cooling system to project images and sound throughout the building. He set up cameras in strategic locations. He even brought folding chairs, like setting up for a performance. Because that's exactly what this was, the final act of Rick Dalton's transformation from victim to executioner. Saturday afternoon, Rick sent Dean a text from a burner phone, emergency meeting about insurance claim. Ice factory on Industrial Road. Come alone. Big money involved. 30 minutes later, he sent Kara a different message from the same phone. Rick is planning something stupid. Meet me at the old ice factory. We need to stop him before he destroys everything. Then Rick drove to the factory and waited. Dean arrived first, his BMW looking absurdly out of place next to the crumbling industrial building. He walked inside cautiously, calling out, "Hello? Anyone here? Got your message about the insurance thing?" Rick stepped out of the shadows like something from a horror movie. His work clothes were pristine, his tools arranged with surgical precision on a nearby table. "Hello, Dean." Dean spun around, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally fear. "Rick, what the hell is this about?" "It's about truth," Rick said calmly. "Something you and my wife seem allergic to. Look, if this is about Kara, it's about everything." Rick gestured to the massive screens he'd set up throughout the space, about lies and betrayal and consequences. The screens flickered to life, displaying text messages between Dean and Kara, explicit photos, financial records, the divorce papers with Dean's name already listed as the boy's new stepfather. Dean's face went ashen. "Rick, let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you pretended to be my friend while sleeping with my wife. How you convinced her to steal from our joint accounts. How you planned to take over my business while I paid child support for your bastards. The boys are mine." Dean looked genuinely shocked. Rick laughed bitterly. "Jesus, Dean, you're even stupider than I thought." Car doors slammed outside. Kara had arrived. She walked into the factory like she owned it, chin raised in defiance. But when she saw the screens displaying her most intimate betrayals, her confidence cracked like thin ice. "Rick, what is this?" "This is the reckoning," Rick said simply. Kara looked between Rick and Dean, calculating odds like the manipulative predator she'd always been. "Okay, fine, you found out. So what? Our marriage was dead anyway. I did what I had to do." "What you had to do?" Rick's voice rose for the first time. "You had to lie about paternity? You had to steal money to plan my complete financial devastation while pretending to love me?" "I never loved you," Kara screamed, her mask finally falling away completely. "You're boring and small and pathetic. Dean offers me a real life, not this working-class nightmare." Dean stepped forward, suddenly finding courage. "Rick, I'm sorry it happened this way, but Kara's right. She deserves better than what you can give her." "Better?" Rick picked up a heavy wrench from his tool table. "You mean like a man who's about to lose everything because of tax fraud? Like a man whose business just got shut down by chemical contamination? Like a man who's been unknowingly raising another man's children while that man slept with his wife?" Dean's face flushed red. "You son of a bitch. You sabotaged my warehouse." "I fixed a problem," Rick said coldly, "just like I fix everything else." Dean lunged forward, swinging wildly at Rick's head. But Rick had been working with his hands his entire life, while Dean had been working with stock portfolios. The fight lasted about 15 seconds. Rick ducked Dean's clumsy punch and drove his fist into Dean's solar plexus, doubling him over. Then he grabbed Dean by the collar and slammed him against the concrete wall, hard enough to rattle his teeth. "You want to fight me?" Rick hissed in Dean's ear. "You want to take my wife, my kids, my money, my business, and now you want to fight me too?" Rick spun Dean around and hit him in the face with the wrench, not hard enough to cause permanent. damage, but hard enough to break his nose and send blood streaming down his expensive shirt. Dean collapsed to his knees, clutching his face and whimpering. All his smooth confidence evaporated, leaving behind a broken, bleeding man begging for mercy. "Please," Dean gasped. "Please don't kill me." "Kill you?" Rick looked genuinely puzzled. "Dean, I don't want to kill you. I want you to live a very long life. I want you to spend every day of that life remembering what it feels like to lose everything you care about." Rick turned to Kara, who was pressed against the wall in terror. "Your turn." "Rick, please think about the boys. Think about our family." "Our family?" Rick activated another screen, showing the legal documents Kara had prepared. "According to these papers, we don't have a family. According to these papers, you were planning to take my sons and my money and disappear into Dean's mansion." "They're not your sons," Kara screamed. "They never were. You were just the idiot who paid for everything while I built a real life." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Rick nodded slowly, as if Kara had just confirmed a mathematical equation. "There it is," he said quietly. "The truth." Finally, Rick walked over to Dean, who was still bleeding on the concrete floor. He grabbed Dean's phone and found Kara's contact information. "You know what's interesting about modern technology?" Rick said conversationally. "Everything gets recorded. Every text, every call, every betrayal." He played a recording of Kara's voice from the phone speaker. "Rick's such a pathetic loser. When this is over, I'll have his house, his money, and his kids, and he'll be living in some studio apartment paying me alimony for the rest of his miserable life." Dean looked up at Kara in horror. "You said you loved me." "I love what you can give me," Kara replied coldly. "Just like I used Rick for what he could give me. It's called being smart." Rick pulled out a final folder, the thickest one yet. "Speaking of being smart, let me show you how smart I've been." The folder contained legal documents Rick had been preparing with a divorce attorney who specialized in paternity fraud cases, financial records proving Kara's theft, evidence of Dean's tax evasion even, documentation of their plan to fraudulently claim child support. "See, the thing about revenge," Rick explained, "is that it's not about violence. It's about consequences, natural, legal, devastating consequences." He handed copies of the documents to both Kara and Dean. "Kara, you're going to be charged with paternity fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Dean, you're looking at tax evasion, business fraud, and conspiracy to commit identity theft." Kara's hands shook as she read the papers. "You can't do this. I'm the mother of those children. Those children deserve better than a lying fraud for a mother," Rick said quietly. "And legally speaking, since you committed paternity fraud, you'll be paying me back every penny of child support I provided for kids you knew weren't mine." Dean struggled to his feet, still clutching his broken nose. "Rick, let's make a deal. I can pay you money, whatever you want." "What I want," Rick said, "is for both of you to understand what it feels like to lose everything you thought was yours." He pressed a button on a remote control. The screens throughout the factory began broadcasting live to social media accounts Rick had created. Every ugly word Kara and Dean had spoken, every cruel confession, every moment of their complete moral bankruptcy was being streamed to their friends, families, and professional contacts. Kara watched in horror as her real estate colleagues began commenting on the live stream. Her phone started buzzing with calls and texts as her carefully constructed reputation crumbled in real time. "You're destroying us," she whispered. "You destroyed yourselves," Rick replied. "I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." Rick walked toward the exit, leaving Kara and Dean to face the consequences of their choices. At the doorway, he turned back. "Oh, and Dean, your insurance company called. They're not covering the warehouse damage. Turns out your policy doesn't include coverage for criminal activity. You'll be declaring bankruptcy by Christmas." "Rick, wait." Kara started forward. "Don't." Rick's voice stopped her cold. "Don't say my name. Don't contact me. Don't come to the house. Your lawyer can communicate with my lawyer. That's it. What about the boys?" Rick paused for a moment. His carefully controlled fury cracked, showing the pain underneath. "The boys will be fine. They'll have a father who actually loves them, not a sperm donor who sees them as meal tickets. And they'll have a mother who—" Rick looked at Kara with something approaching pity. "Actually, they'll need therapy to deal with having you as a mother." Rick left them in the abandoned factory with their broken dreams and bleeding consciences. The live stream continued broadcasting their humiliation to the world. 6 months later, Rick sat in family court, listening to a judge read the final custody ruling. Kara had been found guilty of paternity fraud and ordered to pay Rick restitution for 13 years of falsified child support. She'd lost her real estate license, her house, and her reputation. Dean's bankruptcy had been finalized the previous month. The IRS had seized his assets, and he was facing federal tax evasion charges. The man who'd once lived in a mansion was now renting a studio apartment and working at a chain restaurant. But the sweetest moment came at Tommy's Little League game the following spring. Rick was in the stands, cheering as his son, because Tommy was his son in every way that mattered, hit a double to left field. Kara appeared beside the bleachers, looking haggard and desperate. She'd lost 30 pounds and aged 5 years and 12 months. "Rick," she said quietly, "please, can we talk?" Rick didn't take his eyes off the field. "Nothing to talk about. The boys miss me. They ask about me. The boys are in therapy, learning to process having a mother who lied to them their entire lives. They're doing fine. I made mistakes. You made choices." Rick finally looked at her. "Actions have consequences. You taught me that." Kara's eyes filled with tears. "I'm working at a grocery store, Rick. Living in a one-bedroom apartment. I lost everything. Good." The single word hit Kara like a physical blow. She stood there for a moment, realizing that the man she'd manipulated and betrayed had become something she didn't recognize, something harder, something that couldn't be moved by tears or manipulation. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not," Rick replied. On the field, Tommy rounded second base and headed for third. Rick stood up, cheering loudly for the boy who called him Dad, regardless of DNA. Kara walked away, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She never approached Rick again. That evening, Rick tucked both boys into bed in the house he'd managed to keep through careful legal maneuvering. Jake hugged him tight. "Dad, are you happy now?" Rick smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in 2 years. "Yeah, buddy, I'm happy." "Good," Jake said sleepily. "You deserve to be happy." Rick turned off the lights and walked downstairs to his workshop. On the wall hung a photo of him with the boys at last month's school science fair. Below it, almost hidden behind his tool rack, was the Polaroid that had started everything. Rick pulled out the photo and stared at it one final time. Then he fed it into his paper shredder, watching Kara's smug expression disappear into mechanical. Teeth that chewed up lies as efficiently as they'd once chewed up paternity tests. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. Rick's repair truck sat in the driveway next to a newer model he'd been able to afford after Kara's restitution payments started arriving. Rick Dalton had learned an important lesson about consequences. Sometimes they took a while to arrive, but when they did, they were worth the wait. Some mechanics fix machines, others fix lives. Rick had done both.